The Arizona sun was setting, casting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. Jack Reynolds walked down a quiet street, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy rhythm. His mind was far from the present, lost in memories of a life he couldn't seem to leave behind. It had been 2 years since Jack left the army, but the weight of his past stayed with him. The missions, the losses, and the long nights of silence. Nothing had worked to fill the emptiness. Not therapy, not work, not the countless hours trying to feel normal again. Then there was Rex. Rex had been his partner, his protector, a German shepherd with unmatched loyalty. Rex had saved Jack's life more times than he could count. But after an injury, Rex had been retired, and Jack hadn't seen him since. Now Jack stood in front of a small, worn-down animal shelter. His sister, Emily, had begged him to come. "A dog might help," she'd said. Jack wasn't sure, but something had pulled him here. As he stepped inside, rows of cages lined the walls. Some dogs barked eagerly, tails wagging. Others sat quietly, their eyes tired and distant. Jack moved through the aisles, but none of the dogs felt right. He was ready to leave when a staff member stopped him. "There's one more," she said. "He's in the back. You should see him." Jack followed her down a narrow hallway. She stopped in front of a cage. Inside was a large German shepherd lying in the corner. His black and tan fur was familiar, but his eyes were empty. Jack froze. "Rex," he whispered. The dog raised his head but didn't move. No recognition. Jack stood frozen, his eyes locked on the dog in the cage. The German shepherd lying in the corner looked familiar, but something was missing. The energy, the spark, everything that had made Rex the dog he once knew, was gone. "Rex?" Jack whispered again, his voice trembling. The dog lifted his head slowly, his dark eyes meeting Jack's, but there was no reaction. No wagging tail, no spark of recognition. Jack felt his chest tighten, a weight pressing down on him. How could Rex not recognize him? "He's been through a lot," the shelter worker said quietly, breaking the silence. "We found him at a smaller shelter in another state. He's got anxiety, doesn't trust people easily. Whoever had him after retirement couldn't handle him." Jack swallowed hard. His mind raced back to their days in the army, the bond they'd built, the dangerous missions they had survived. Rex had been more than just a dog. He had been Jack's lifeline, and now that connection felt shattered. "He was my partner," Jack murmured, barely audible. The shelter worker's eyes widened. "You know him?" Jack nodded. "He saved my life. More than once." For a moment, the memories overwhelmed him. He could see Rex charging through smoke-filled fields, fearlessly following commands. He remembered the nights they sat together in silence, Rex's steady presence keeping him grounded. But now, as he looked at the dog in front of him, all he could see was how much had changed. Rex wasn't the same, and Jack couldn't blame him. They had both been through too much. "Would you like to spend some time with him?" the worker asked, her voice kind but cautious. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I need to try." The worker unlocked the cage and stepped aside. Rex didn't move. He stayed in the corner, his body tense. Jack knelt down, extending his hand slowly. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "It's me, Jack." Rex tilted his head slightly as if trying to process the words, but he stayed where he was. Jack's throat tightened. This wasn't going to be easy. "Let's take him to the play yard," the worker suggested. "It might help." Jack followed her outside. The yard was small, enclosed by a chain-link fence. Rex stepped out of the cage cautiously, his movements stiff and deliberate. He sniffed the air, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. Jack sat down on the grass, giving Rex space. He didn't call out or try to force anything. Instead, he watched, studying every movement. He could see the fear in Rex's posture, the way his muscles stayed tight, ready to retreat at any moment. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. Jack's heart ached as he realized just how much Rex had changed. After a while, the worker approached Jack. "What do you think?" Jack stood up, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "I'm taking him home." The worker hesitated. "It might take a while for him to adjust. He's been through a lot." "So have I," Jack replied. "We'll figure it out. Together." There was a determination in his voice that left no room for argument. As they prepared to leave, Jack glanced at Rex, who was still keeping his distance. No matter how long it takes, he thought to himself, I'll bring him back. He's still my partner, even if he doesn't remember. The drive home was quiet, almost unsettling. Jack glanced at the rearview mirror, watching Rex lying in the back of the truck on the blanket he had laid out. The German shepherd's eyes were fixed on the passing scenery, but there was no movement, no sign of ease. Jack's heart sank further. When they arrived at the house, a simple place surrounded by a large yard, Jack parked and opened the truck door. Come on, boy, he said, his voice calm and encouraging. Rex hesitated. For a moment it seemed like he wouldn't budge, but after a long pause he stepped down cautiously. Jack led Rex inside, moving slowly to avoid overwhelming him. The house was quiet, clean, and had a corner prepared just for Rex. A new dog bed, shiny food and water bowls, and a few toys were neatly placed. This is your spot, buddy, Jack said, gesturing to the corner. But Rex didn't move toward it. Instead, he stayed near the door, his posture stiff, as if he didn't trust the space. Jack sighed but didn't push. That evening, as Jack prepared a simple dinner, he couldn't help but glance at Rex every few minutes. The dog stood in the same spot, staring into the distance. Jack's mind flashed back to their days in the army, how Rex used to be full of energy, running to him after a mission, tail wagging. Now Rex looked like a shadow of the dog he used to know. After dinner, Jack left the bedroom door open, hoping Rex might feel safe enough to come closer. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to think of ways to reach him. Just as he was drifting off, he heard the soft sound of paws on the floor. Jack turned his head slightly and saw Rex lying near the bedroom door. Not close, but not far either. A faint smile crossed Jack's face. Small steps, he whispered to himself. The next morning, Jack woke to find Rex sitting by the window in the living room. His ears were perked, his eyes distant, as though lost in thought. Jack approached carefully, not wanting to startle him. Morning, Rex, he said softly, stretching his arms. Rex didn't move, didn't even glance at him. It was hard not to feel rejected, but Jack understood. Rex was carrying burdens, just like him. Determined to make progress, Jack grabbed a tennis ball later that day and tossed it gently across the yard. What do you say, boy? Want to play? Rex watched the ball roll, but he didn't move. Jack sighed and picked it up again, repeating the throw, but the response was the same. As the sun set, Jack sat on the porch, watching Rex lying in the yard, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I'm not giving up on you, Jack said firmly. You didn't give up on me when I needed you. The journey was just beginning. The first few days at home were harder than Jack had anticipated. Rex was cautious, constantly assessing his surroundings. He didn't explore the house much and stayed near the front door, as if ready to bolt at any moment. Jack tried to give Rex space, but it was tough not to feel the sting of rejection. Every time he reached out, whether it was tossing a ball, offering a treat, or speaking softly, Rex pulled back, his body tense and eyes wary. It was clear that the dog wasn't just wounded on the outside. The pain ran much deeper. Still, Jack refused to give up. He reminded himself that this was a process, one that couldn't be rushed. One evening, Jack sat on the living room floor, fiddling with an old box of military items he hadn't opened in years. Inside were medals, photos, and keepsakes from his time in the army. Near the bottom he found it, Rex's old training vest. Jack held the vest in his hands, the familiar scent of sand and sweat bringing back memories. He thought of the missions they had survived together, how Rex had been his lifeline in the darkest moments. Let's see if this jogs your memory, Jack muttered, standing up. He walked to the backyard where Rex was lying under a tree, his eyes half closed. Jack placed the vest on the ground a few feet away from the dog and stepped back. Rex opened his eyes and sniffed the air. His gaze fell on the vest, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw a flicker of recognition. Rex slowly approached, his movements cautious. He sniffed the vest, his nose flaring as he took in the scent. But then, just as quickly, Rex stepped back, his tail low and body tense. The moment was gone. Jack's shoulders slumped. It's okay, he said softly, picking up the vest. We'll get there, buddy, one step at a time. That night, Jack left the bedroom door open again. He didn't expect much, but he hoped Rex would feel comfortable enough to come closer. Hours later, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Jack woke to the sound of paws on the floor. This time, Rex wasn't by the door. He was lying on the rug in the corner of the bedroom, his head resting on his paws. Jack didn't move or say a word. He simply smiled in the dark, knowing this was progress. The next morning, Jack woke to find Rex watching him from across the room. The dog's gaze was calm, though still distant. Jack stretched and greeted him with a quiet, "Morning, boy." Determined to rebuild their connection, Jack spent the day trying small gestures. He tossed the tennis ball again, but Rex didn't budge. He placed food near Rex's spot, but the dog only ate after Jack left the room. Each attempt at closeness was met with silence, but Jack noticed one small change. Rex had stopped avoiding him completely. That evening, as Jack sat on the porch, he thought back to their time in the field. He remembered how Rex had always been by his side, fearless and loyal. "I know you're still in there," Jack said quietly, looking at Rex lying under the tree. "We'll find our way back." Rex didn't move, but Jack saw the dog's ears twitch at the sound of his voice. It was small, but it was enough to keep him going. The days passed slowly, each one feeling like a test of patience. Jack had spent countless hours trying to reconnect with Rex, but the progress was minimal. Rex still kept his distance, avoiding direct contact. Yet Jack refused to lose hope. One morning, Jack sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching Rex in the backyard. The German shepherd lay under the shade of a tree, his body relaxed but his eyes distant. Jack took a deep breath and went inside to retrieve something special. Rex's old rubber ball. The ball had been one of Rex's favorite toys during their time in the army. It wasn't just a toy, it was a piece of their bond, a reminder of the days when trust came easily between them. Jack walked back outside, holding the ball in his hand. "Let's see if you remember this," he said, his voice soft but hopeful. He gently tossed the ball a few feet away from Rex. The dog's ears twitched, and his eyes followed the ball as it rolled across the grass. For a moment, Jack thought Rex might go after it, but the dog stayed still, his body tense. "It's okay," Jack murmured. "We'll try again." He picked up the ball and threw it again, this time a little farther. Rex tilted his head slightly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. But once again, he didn't move. Jack sighed and sat down on the porch steps. "I know it's hard, buddy. I know you're scared," he said, more to himself than to Rex. "But we're not giving up." That afternoon, Jack decided to take a different approach. He grabbed Rex's old training whistle, something he hadn't used in years. The whistle had been a key part of their missions, a signal that always brought Rex back to him, no matter the danger. Standing in the backyard, Jack blew 2 short bursts on the whistle. The sound echoed through the yard, sharp and familiar. Rex's ears perked up, and he turned his head toward Jack. For a moment, his posture softened, as if the sound had triggered something buried deep in his memory. Jack's heart raced. "Come on, boy," he said softly, kneeling down. Rex took one hesitant step forward, then another. But just as quickly, he stopped, his body stiffening. The spark in his eyes faded, replaced by doubt. He turned away, retreating back to his spot under the tree. Jack felt his chest tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "It's okay," he said. "We'll go at your pace." That evening, as the sun set and the air grew cooler, Jack sat outside on the porch, spinning the rubber ball between his fingers. He watched Rex lying in the yard, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You didn't give up on me," Jack said quietly. "Not when I needed you the most. So I'm not giving up on you." The next morning, something small but significant happened. While Jack was chopping wood in the yard, he noticed Rex watching him from a distance. The dog's ears were perked, his head tilted slightly, as if curious about what Jack was doing. Jack paused and smiled. "Want to help, boy?" he asked, his tone playful. Rex didn't move, but he didn't look away either. It was a subtle change, but Jack took it as a sign of progress. Later that day, during a walk around the yard, Jack picked up a stick and tossed it lightly forward. To his surprise, Rex took a few cautious steps toward the stick before stopping. He didn't retrieve it, but the movement was enough to make Jack smile. "Ah, so you remember how to play," Jack said with a chuckle. "You're just pretending you don't." That night, Jack left the back door open as he sat on the couch. Rex walked inside, lying down near Jack's chair. It wasn't much, but it was the closest Rex had come to him since arriving. Jack looked down at the dog and whispered, "We're getting there, partner." Little by little, the bond they once had wasn't gone. It was just buried, waiting to be rebuilt, and Jack was determined to uncover it, no matter how long it took. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the yard as Jack stepped outside, Rex trailing a few paces behind. It had been weeks since Jack brought him home, and while progress was slow, small moments of trust were beginning to surface. Jack had an idea to take their progress further, something that might reignite a piece of the bond they had shared. He went back inside and retrieved Rex's old military vest. Holding it in his hands, he felt the weight of the memories attached to it. The vest carried the scent of sand, sweat, and everything they had endured together. Jack stepped outside, his heart pounding with hope. "Let's try something different today," he said, kneeling down. "You remember this, don't you?" Jack placed the vest on the ground a few feet away from Rex and stepped back, giving him space. Rex stood still, his ears perked as he sniffed the air. Slowly, the German Shepherd approached, his movements cautious. He lowered his nose to the vest, inhaling deeply. For a moment, Jack saw something shift in Rex's posture. His tail twitched and his eyes softened, as if a memory was trying to surface. Jack held his breath, hoping this would be the breakthrough they needed. But then, Rex pulled back, retreating a few steps. His body tensed, and the flicker of recognition faded. Jack sighed, but he didn't let his disappointment show. "It's okay, buddy," he said gently. "We'll get there, one step at a time." Jack picked up the vest and sat on the porch, watching Rex from a distance. He felt the familiar ache of frustration creeping in, but he pushed it aside. "He's trying," Jack thought to himself, "just like I am." That afternoon, Jack grabbed the old rubber ball again and tossed it across the yard. This time, Rex's ears perked up, and his eyes followed the ball. Jack waited, not saying a word. After a long pause, Rex stood up and took a few hesitant steps toward the ball. Jack's breath caught. "Come on, boy," he whispered, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. Rex reached the ball and sniffed it, his nose flaring as he took in the familiar scent. Then, to Jack's surprise, Rex picked it up with his mouth and turned to face him. Jack froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "You did it," Jack said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Rex walked back toward him slowly, the ball still in his mouth. When he reached Jack, he dropped the ball at his feet and looked up, his eyes no longer distant. There was something new in his gaze, a spark of recognition, a hint of trust. Jack knelt down, his hands trembling as he picked up the ball. He didn't try to touch Rex, afraid of breaking the fragile moment. Instead, he tossed the ball again, watching as Rex ran after it with more confidence this time. For the rest of the afternoon, Jack and Rex played in the yard. Each time Rex brought the ball back, his tail wagged slightly, a small but unmistakable sign that the wall between them was beginning to crumble. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack sat on the porch steps, the rubber ball resting in his hand. Rex lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws. The distance that had once felt insurmountable was now shrinking, replaced by a quiet sense of companionship. That evening, Jack decided to push their progress one step further. He retrieved the military whistle from his belongings, its familiar silver sheen catching the light. He stood in the yard, holding it tightly in his hand. "This is it, partner," Jack murmured. He blew 2 short bursts on the whistle, the same signal he had used during their missions. Rex's ears shot up, and he turned his head sharply toward Jack. For a moment, the German Shepherd stood still, his body tense but alert. Then slowly, he began to move. Rex approached Jack cautiously, his eyes fixed on him. When he reached Jack, he stopped and sniffed the air around him. Jack didn't move, letting Rex take the lead. "You remember, don't you?" Jack said quietly, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. Rex took another step forward, closing the gap between them. He lowered his head and gently touched Jack's hand with his nose. The gesture was small, but to Jack, it was monumental. Jack swallowed hard, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. "You're coming back to me," he whispered. For the first time in weeks, Jack reached out and placed a hand on Rex's head. The dog didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into Jack's touch, his body relaxing. That night, as Jack sat on the couch, Rex lay beside him on the floor. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was comforting. Jack looked down at Rex and whispered, "We're almost there, partner." Almost there. The bond they had shared wasn't gone. It was still there, buried beneath the pain and time, and now it was beginning to shine through again. The morning air was crisp, and the yard glistened with dew as Jack stepped outside. Rex followed him, his movements calmer than before. There was something different about the dog today, a sense of ease Jack hadn't seen since the day they reunited. Jack held the rubber ball in his hand, spinning it between his fingers. "Let's see if you're ready for more," he said softly, his tone gentle but hopeful. He tossed the ball lightly across the yard. Rex's eyes followed it, and without hesitation, he darted forward. Jack watched in awe as Rex scooped the ball up in his mouth and trotted back toward him. When Rex reached Jack, he dropped the ball at his feet, his tail wagging faintly. Jack knelt down, his smile wide. "Good boy," he said, his voice filled with emotion. He tossed the ball again, and Rex ran after it with more confidence, his movements fluid and purposeful. For hours they played in the yard, the sound of Jack's laughter mixing with the rhythmic thud of the ball hitting the ground. Each time Rex returned the ball, his tail wagged a little more, and his eyes shone brighter. Later, Jack decided to take Rex beyond the yard. Grabbing the leash, he clipped it onto Rex's collar. "Let's go for a walk," he said. At first, Rex hesitated when Jack opened the gate. He stood still, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the world beyond the fence. Jack crouched beside him, placing a steady hand on his back. "It's okay, buddy. We're safe now," he said reassuringly. Rex took a cautious step forward, then another. With Jack leading the way, they walked along the quiet dirt path that circled the property. Rex sniffed the air, his ears swiveling at every sound. Though his posture remained alert, he seemed less guarded, more willing to trust the man walking beside him. As they reached the edge of the property, Jack stopped and crouched down to Rex's level. "You're doing great, boy," he said, his voice calm and encouraging. Rex turned his head, his gaze meeting Jack's. For the first time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. When they returned home, Rex followed Jack inside without pause. As Jack prepared dinner, he noticed Rex lying on the rug near the kitchen. It wasn't just the proximity that struck Jack. It was the way Rex seemed at ease, his body relaxed, his breathing steady. Jack smiled and crouched down, holding out a piece of chicken. Rex stood, walked over, and took the food directly from Jack's hand. It was a small moment, but for Jack, it meant everything. That night, Rex lay beside Jack's bed, his head resting on his paws. Jack looked down at him and whispered, "We're almost there, partner." Almost there. Rex's eyes flickered open briefly before he closed them again, his body peaceful. Jack knew their bond was no longer a memory. It was something they were rebuilding, one step at a time. The sun rose bright the next morning, spreading a warm golden light across the yard. Jack stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee in hand, watching as Rex wandered through the grass. There was a calmness in the way Rex moved now, his steps less cautious, his posture more relaxed. Jack couldn't help but smile. For weeks he had fought to bring back the dog who had once been his closest companion. And now, standing in the morning light, Rex no longer looked like the distant, guarded dog Jack had met in the shelter. He was starting to look like the partner Jack remembered. "Today's a big day, buddy," Jack said, setting his coffee down. In one hand, he held Rex's old military vest. In the other, a leash. "We're going to a place you used to love." Jack and Rex climbed into the truck, heading to a park they used to visit during their rare days off from training. The drive was peaceful. Rex sat in the back seat with his head slightly out the window, the wind brushing against his fur. Jack glanced at him through the rearview mirror and felt a wave of pride. When they arrived, Jack unclipped the leash and stepped back. "Go on, boy," he said. Rex hesitated for only a moment before running into the open field. Jack grabbed the rubber ball from his pocket and threw it across the grass. Rex chased after it, his tail wagging as he brought it back, dropping it at Jack's feet. They repeated the game over and over, the laughter and joy feeling like old times. As the sun began to set, Jack sat on a bench, the rubber ball resting in his hand. Rex lay beside him, his head resting on Jack's leg. Jack looked out at the horizon, his heart full. "I told you I wouldn't give up," Jack said softly, stroking Rex's head. "We're back, partner. We're back." Rex didn't move, but his eyes closed in contentment. For the first time in years, Jack felt whole again. Their bond wasn't just a memory. It was alive, stronger than ever. As they headed home, Jack knew the future wouldn't be easy, but it didn't matter. Whatever came next, they would face it together. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the bonds we share with animals. Sometimes they're more than just pets. They're family, friends, and even heroes. Jack and Rex's journey wasn't easy, but it's a reminder that patience, love, and determination can heal even the deepest wounds. Have you ever experienced a connection with an animal that changed your life? Maybe it was a dog who comforted you during hard times, or a cat who brought joy to your days. We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. And if you believe in the incredible bond between humans and animals, show your support by leaving a like on this video. It's a simple way to help us share more inspiring stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable connection between people and animals. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when we release new content that's guaranteed to move you. Jack and Rex's journey proves that even in the hardest moments, there's always hope. Sometimes it just takes a loyal friend to remind us of what truly matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness, whether to humans or animals, has the power to change lives. We'll see you in the next story.